Hello everybody and welcome to another painting video with myself John, and in this one we're going to be tackling a Team Yankee Challenger 1 main battle tank for the British forces. One of my favourite tanks to come out for this range, not only in its miniature design, as in the design of the actual plastic kit and the way the plastic kit goes together, but also one of my all-time favourite tanks from British tank history basically. As much as I love Challenger 2, this one really set the benchmark and really put the British into that full-on modern NBT that everyone's very familiar with now, like Abrams and so on. And as a predecessor, the Chieftain was a great tank. The Chieftain had a lot of great stuff to it, but Challenger really honed the technology that Chieftain was verging on the edge of, and really hammered it down and gave it a very we got a very capable tank out of it, as was proven in the first Gulf War in the 90s. So it's great to have one in 15mm for Team Yankee. It's great to see them down on the table and see a whole lot of them all over the place. So before we get stuck into the painting, remember this is about putting something down on the table. Now, the end result is pretty good. I quite like the end result of this one, but it's all about keeping things simple, keeping things effective, and repeatable, so that you can repeat it across an entire force without too much problems. And when you put it down on the table, you go, yeah, I'm happy with that, I'm proud of what I've done. So keep that in mind as we go through it. There is simple things in there, and again, I'll be playing with the airbrush. So if you're thinking about getting an airbrush or wanting to figure out where to start with an airbrush if you've already got one, do pay attention and check out what I do with it. So guys, I hope you enjoy it. Let's get stuck in. So with the Challenger here already primed, as usual, I've been priming in Stynylrez black through the airbrush, a good couple of coats of that. We've got a nice smooth finish to the vehicle. So the next thing I want to do is to start highlighting. So we're going to be pre-shading again. The first thing we're going to do is remove the turret, and we're going to work on the hull. So I have my Stynylrez white primer in the airbrush. It has a tiny amount of thinner, but not very much. And what we're going to aim to do here is pick out the more interesting sort of higher spots. So let's go for it. And to make this a bit more interesting, what we do on the front plate is highlight hard towards the edge and then fade back. So around the engine grills, we're going to leave all this dark because it's going to mostly be under the turret. So across here, we're going to draw out in hard white the edges here. So down the back of the hull, we don't really need much here. So just a little bit, just to brighten that up a touch. Across the sides on the bazooka plates, we want to work from the top down here. And what that gives us is this natural shadow coming off the mounting points on the bazooka plates, as well as a fade down to the bottom of the track area. So we'll do that again on this side. So same as before, we're looking at picking out the higher points. So along the back of the turret bustle. basically giving us something like that on the top. So we'll do a bit of the side, not much though. Mostly on this side, to be honest, because it's where there's more solid things. And that is essentially what we have for our pre-shade. And it looks quite interesting, and hopefully once our base color is down, it will retain some of that shading, so we have to be careful when we go into that and make sure it's thin. But we'll talk about that once I've cleaned the airbrush out and swapped the paint over to actually get our base coat done. With the airbrush clean, we're now moving on to our base coat, and the base coat we're going to be using is Team Yankee's Chieftain Green, which is great for the British armour. So let's pull our turret off again, move that to the side, and let's start airbrushing this down. Now we've thinned this about 2 to 1, and we're going to give it several light coats just to build up the green without completely ruining our pre-shading work. So let's have a go. So that's the hull. That's not too bad. You can still see a lot of the shading present there when I move the model around a little bit, and we're still, you're getting the lighter parts here with a little bit of a fade that goes back to a light part here, and you can still see that. So let's move that away and let's get the turret done too. Same principle as before, just several light coats until you're happy with the finish. I'm going to move the hull out of the way. And it's really as simple as that. Once you have your pre-shading down, you get to play with your base coat and really get to see that sort of color modulated effect, that sort of pre-shaded effect, really shine through. And if we take the turret off and put the hull back down, being careful not to press too hard and abrade what we've just done, I put the turret back down, you get a better idea of how the tank looks with that shading. So even with the turret off to the side, we still have the shading where it needs to be, and it makes the tank look a lot more interesting from a bit more of a distance. You can tell it a bit more easily, and the closer you get to it, the more maybe an opponent is going to look at your vehicles and go, oh, that's really nicely painted, what did you do? And then you get to strike up a little conversation and make the whole experience a bit more interesting. So with that, we're going to clean the airbrush out, and then we're going to move on to some camouflage. So before we carry on, I just have one little thing. I did forget to paint the bore vacuator on the barrel while I was airbrushing the Chieftain Green down, so I just touched that up quick with a brush. It may not be the neatest work I've ever done, but it's there. So, time to remove the turret, and we're going to start applying some camouflage, and for that, we're going to be using Team Yankee Worn Rubber. I like this one because I don't like painting black just straight on as a camouflage color, because when we go to shade it, we can make it look more black. We can make it look a bit more convincing. So we have it in the airbrush, thinned about 2 to 1, possibly even 3 to 1, and we're going to be airbrushing that on as neatly as we can. I like hard edge camouflage on my British vehicles, but I don't mind just having a little bit of poetic license and just airbrushing it on, because I would imagine that World War III kicks off, a lot of these tanks are maybe in different colours or in the wrong colours, and they're not going to be concerned about getting a lot of squatties in there with paintbrushes. They're gonna spray it on as quick as they can. So as much as the aesthetic for the British is clean camouflage lines, it's not something I've done before with my Chieftain force, and I don't feel like doing it on these as well. So let's just go for it and just see how it turns out. What's great about lowering the air pressure in the airbrush is that we can really control how big our lines are, which is great. We can outline the camouflage and then fill it in easily. So something as simple as that. So let's just keep going. And that's basically it for the hull. I don't mind that the camouflage is sort of eliminating a bit of that highlighting. I quite like how that's turning out. So just tidy it up a little bit in places. I'm also not concerned, you've probably already realised that, I'm not that concerned about a bit of overspray as well. The pressure is a bit lower in the airbrush. The overspray isn't going to completely ruin the look of the vehicle. So what we do now is we place the turret back on, make sure it's facing forward, and what we then do is take the camouflage up onto our turret. So I have to make sure as well that the airbrush nozzle, the needle, is clean as well, because as we're spraying at a lower pressure, there's more chance of paint gathering on it, and then we start to see what you might have already noticed, a little bit of spitting and splattering starting to occur. So keep the needle clean, and then we can just continue. So with that done, it's time to clean out the airbrush again, and that is us done with our airbrushing for now. I believe we might come back to it in a little bit, but that's our camouflage, and it's nice and simple. And I think once we have washes and highlighting, you know, a little bit of edge highlighting and stuff down, that's going to look very effective. So we'll go clean the airbrush, and then we'll come back and start to add out, block out a few other colors just to get some detailing down. So now we're going to be moving on to a little bit of blocking out some colors. Pardon me. And the first one we're going to be blocking out is the shroud over our gun barrel. So what we're going to be using for that is Team Yankee Comrade Khaki. And we're just going to be a matter of giving this a good base coat of that. So we may need a couple of layers with this as well, just to make sure. And that should do it. Once that's dry, we'll have a look at it, maybe give it another coat off camera. So after that, we're going to be moving on to Vallejo Panzer Ace's Weathered Wood, and we'll be picking out some of the Pioneer tools on the back quarter of the tank. So we have a shovel here. We're then going to be moving on to Vallejo Model Color Natural Steel. And for that, I think I'm going to paint this piece in this time, because I think this is the pry bar or the tanker bar. Not totally up on my Challenger 1 tool stowage layout, so I could be wrong. Just fine, someone can tell me if I'm wrong, that's fine. We'll also paint the machine gun, our GPMG. And you may be wondering, well, why? You know, you could just do this black. Well, I'm going to do something later on. Hopefully, if it works, it'll be a little bit of a time saver. And I think we'll leave the... Yeah, we're gonna leave the tow cables and paint them a different color. So anywhere else I want to put, I think I'm going to put natural steel into our headlights as well. Just to add a bit of interest to the front of the vehicle. And I think that'll probably do it. So the next color we're going for is Citadel Abaddon Black, so basically just a matte black. And we're going to be using that on some details, and I'll explain why. And this is also the reason why I said earlier we weren't going to camouflage in black, because now we're going to be playing with different material types, and I didn't want the camouflage to be so dark as to just obliterate this. So first thing we'll do is paint the mudguards, because the mudguards are metal to this corner edge, and then from that they have this sort of rubber skirt around the edge, so we get to paint the rubber skirt in black. That way we have a slightly different color that defines a change of material. Like that. So we have a slightly darker color just to denote that rubber detail. I'm gonna have to pull the turret off real quick because we also have other rubber parts on the back of the engine deck. So these little pieces here that have all the little holes in them, they're all rubber. They're part of the anti-depression system for the gun to stop the gun just bashing off the top of the engine deck and damaging itself, as well as maybe other parts of the top of the tank. I always like to put these sort of details in because it can make people ask questions, you know, what's that for? Why is that there? Well, it's there to stop the gun barrel bashing itself silly off the top of the tank. Particularly when the gun stabilizer's on, or if it's on manual control and the gunner's just flinging it around and trying to track something on the move, perhaps. The last thing you want to do is tear part of your engine deck off or damage it. Again, it's something in reality that when they come to paint a tank, they wouldn't really care. I've seen a lot of them where they've just painted the green over them. But having a detail like that picked out on a model this size just adds a touch of visual interest. It makes you wonder what that's for. What is that part for? While we're at it, we're going to paint the shovel with the black. Now, I'm going to dip my brush into some water and really thin down some of the black. And what I'm going to do now is put it into the exhaust on both sides, which will start the process of getting our exhaust to look nice and sooty. And we will be applying some pigment powder to that later on as well. But that's the start of it. So one other thing that I forgot about, there's an extra color that I want to do. I have to make sure, well actually, I have forgotten a couple of other places I wanted to put black on, so I don't think I have any rear mudguards to speak of. No, not really. We have the rubber baffles at the base of the gun barrel and the muzzle as well. Both need to be in black, so we need to get those details in as well. And if you want to be particularly interesting or boring, we have the smoke dischargers on either side of the cheeks of the turret, and they would have rubber stops on them. So if you really feel like it, try and get 5 black circles on that particular detail. Now that's going a bit far, to be honest. I normally wouldn't, but I know that particular type of smoke discharger on the Challenger 1, I think at least, I don't know if they've changed it, or I think they maybe changed it for Challenger 2, that there was a different type of smoke discharger. You know, that's how sad I am. Yeah, I think they had the rubber stops on them. Right, we're going strange. We're going some Mephiston red. Basically just a flat red. And all I'm doing with it, again, we're talking about visual interest points and stuff like that on the vehicle. We're going to be painting the 2 fire extinguishers that are on the front. Now, I know a lot of people are going to be saying, well, why would you put a red fire extinguisher on the front of a tank that's meant to be camouflaged? And you're probably right in saying that. But I have seen it on Challenger 2 at least. I can't remember. I know there's a couple of pictures I've seen of Challenger 1s with blue ones and stuff like that, but I'm going to paint them red because it's an interest point. So we're going to let that dry, and once that's dry we're going to work on a couple of other things. But in the meantime, I actually believe the silver, the natural steel, should have dried. So we're going to try our little trick out and see if it works. And there'll be some people who will complain, but that's fine. We're actually going to use some Citadel Contrast Black Templar, and we're going to give it a coat over that silver. And I've done it on my World War II, I've done it on my Flames of War stuff, where I painted my 50 calibers on my Shermans in silver and then put Black Templar over it, and the way it dried made it look like a realistic sort of gunmetal look. So let's see if it works on the GPMG. Before I move on to adding the wash, I did forget one colour, and that was on the tracks. So the tracks have been painted with Vallejo Panzer Ace's track primer. Great little sort of off browny colour that works very good as a base coat for tracks, hence track primer. So we're going to wash now, we're going to wash the entire vehicle, and we're going to apply Agrax Earthshade all over it. So I'm going to get a fairly decent sized brush and just give the whole vehicle a coat of this. We're not going to go too heavy. It's just enough to tint and to get into the details. So let's start with the driver's hatch. And we're just going to apply this all over the model, making sure that we keep our brush strokes nice and smooth on the more flat areas. So the wash is applied and dry, and it's looking pretty decent. And if you look carefully, you can see what I've been doing with the brush strokes is from these handles, I've been drawing down from them after I've put the wash down and smoothed it out. I've then just drawn it a little bit. Adds a little bit of texture to the vehicle, and as I'm seeing now, I can see that my airbrush pre-shading is still present in the green. It's looking a bit more interesting. It's not just a black and green camouflage. Now, obviously, the camouflage is just too dark. There's no... Well, I'm not saying it's too dark. Well, I don't mean it's too dark. Let me try that again. It just has obliterated any pre-shading that was under it, obviously. But that doesn't matter so much because the green is lifting it all up a little bit. And I'm hoping to accentuate that a little bit now with a few dry brushes to get some highlighting down. So the first thing I'm going to do is highlight the barrel shroud, and we're reverting back to some of the earlier paints, we're going to be using weathered wood for that from the Panzer Ace's range. So it's going to be just a very quick touch of a highlight just to bring up a little bit of detail. So let's very carefully just apply that over the top. Like that. So it's a bit minimalist. I don't mind that so much. After that, we're going to move on to the tracks. And the tracks, again, we're revisiting an older color. We're using natural steel. And again, it's just a quick dry brush just to pick out the edges of the track and some of the cleats and stuff on it. So what we want to do with the track is basically that. Okay, so once that's done, we're then going to quickly dry brush a little color over the top surfaces and edges of the vehicle, and we're just basically going to revert back to our chieftain green. And again, this is only to pick out nice sharp edges and get a bit of an edge highlight build up. So nothing too intensive. We want each step to be quick and add something to the overall look of the model. So, for example, just bits here and there. And you can see what I mean, that chieftain green is just enough, particularly in the top of the turret there, you can see on the crew hatches and stuff, it just makes it look a bit more visual, it's a bit more interesting to see. And it's sort of a low contrast highlight, so it is there, but it's one of the base colors of the vehicle too, so it's not a bright, sort of a sandy brown or anything like that. It's still quite subtle, but it's doing an important job. So that'll do that. Now, we'll quickly do some track pads in. Just taking some of our Abaddon Black again from earlier. This does allow you to paint a tank like this with a fairly limited paint palette, you know, a fairly limited collection of paints. So all we want to do is get a stripe of black into the more obvious track pads, and then when we apply our pigment powder, it'll blend in rather nicely. So the track pads have dried, it's now time to put down some pigment powder. And the one I'm choosing for this, just the one this time, I'm going to be going with MIG's Europe Dust. And Europe Dust really is like the Nuln Oil of pigment powders. It's a gorgeous colour, it works very well on darker colour schemes. So we're going to be taking that with a brush like this, which is the one I used for my dry brushing step. And what I'm going to be doing is applying it fairly liberally over the tracks, wheels, and the lower parts of the side skirts. I don't know if they still call them bazooka plates. I think they changed the terminology. I'm not sure. I know I've heard some modern tankers call them side skirts instead of bazooka plates, but I know back as far as Chieftain, they called it bazooka plates. So anyway, that's neither here nor there. So I'm just going to be dabbing the pigment powder on in a rough area, and then we're going to scrub and then swipe up a little bit. Try and get it onto those areas and make it look interesting. So same on the front of the track. Just apply it like that. You can tell it gets really messy really quick. This is another thing I love about working with pigment powders. It can be a really messy step, and it's a really fun step. And again, I like doing it on video because it shows that it doesn't have to be an exact science to apply a pigment powder. And all you need is the powder you want to use and a little bit of either pigment fixer, which you can get from Green Stuff World, which works very well, or isopropyl alcohol, just to seal it down. And isopropyl can be a bit awkward to get, but it's not expensive. And it does the job very well at sealing the powder down. So I'm just focusing the pigment work on this tank just along the lower part of the hull. I'm not going to be taking it up high over any of the upper hull or the turret, but I am going to do a fair amount of it back here. Cover the details we didn't paint. the tail lights and stuff like that, we'll cover those. Make a nice glorious mess of the back of the hull. Alright, now I will put my tub away, and I have a little tub of isopropyl alcohol. So isopropyl will evaporate in air. So all I'm doing is taking the same brush I've applied with, which is this one. I have it soaked, and all I'm doing is just letting the pigment powder get soaked by it. Letting it soak into the pigment powder. We don't want to move it around too much, just let the alcohol sink into it. And that's basically all I want to do. Now, it's just a case of letting that evaporate, letting it dry. Once it's done that, what I'll be doing is my usual of applying a matte varnish, which will be the Citadel Storm Shield. We'll apply that via an airbrush, nice and almost neat. We'll put a couple of drops of thinner in there, let that all dry, and when we come back, that'll be the model entirely finished, and we can have a look at the end result. And here it is, our finished Challenger 1. Now, before I continue on, I must point out that I made a mistake during the pigment powder application. The tub of isopropyl alcohol I had was about a week old. A lot of it had evaporated and it had lost its quick evaporation, its quick drying. So what ended up happening was it looked more like I'd applied a really dirty wash, and it didn't look good. So I reapplied the pigment, took some fresh isopropyl from the bottle I have, and then really carefully dabbed it down once the pigment powder was in place, and that has given me a proper dry looking finish. So it looks far more interesting now with that down. The model also had the matte varnish put down before I put the second layer of pigment powder down, and I think that's probably the way I should be doing it all the time. The isopropyl and the pigment powder should be the very last thing to do after a matte varnish. I'm pretty sure the matte varnish would affect the pigment powder negatively if I did that. But overall, we have a very tidy looking vehicle with not a lot of effort, just a bit of airbrushing, just to hone your skills a bit, keep your skills up with your airbrush if you're already an avid user of it. And then it's just a bit of base coating, a bit of wash, some dry brushing here and there, just picking out certain things. And yeah, basically that's it. We have a perfectly tabletop ready Challenger 1 to join the rest of our British forces for Team Yankee, and it's not a bad looking one at all. Even the black trackpads are still semi-visible, which is exactly what I wanted. I didn't want the track to look either silver or brown. I wanted it to have that mixed medium look to it, because it is two different materials together that are driving over the ground. And I'm quite happy with how the Black Templars turned out on the machine gun as well. You can see it has a little bit of a sheen to it, and I don't think machine guns, anytime I see them on footage, they never really stand out. They're never glossy, they're never really shiny, they're never completely bare steel look to them. They always have that blackening sort of coloration on them. So overall, I think we have a decent shot at a Challenger here. So if I was to do any more, I would be painting in the optics, I'd be painting in periscopes and stuff like that. I'd probably honestly use a black wash or a black paint to paint in the periscopes, and then put either a blue wash or a red wash over them, just to add a bit of coloration to them, because they have a sort of a tinted glass. I can't remember what the glass is called. I know it's a type of armored glass of some sort, I don't know. But overall, for the tabletop, this is certainly a vehicle I'd be happy to see. I'd be happy to either field myself or see my opponent place down. I'd be like, God, you did a really good job on that, you know, that's nice and tidy. And if you're keeping it tidy like that across all the vehicles and all the infantry in your force, then you've got a very handsome looking army. And yeah, I'd be happy to play against this, or I'd be happy to play it myself. So, with that said and done, thank you very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this one and just seen how quick it can be to throw together something that looks effective down on the tabletop. So guys, as always, thank you very much. Take care, stay safe, and I will see you again very soon.
Go ahead and check out our other content on screen now. And while you're at it, why not hit subscribe and remember to ding our dong. Go on, you know you want to click it. Go on.